The days after the encounter with Luciano D'Angelo felt like they stretched on forever, each one heavier than the last. Gianna's usual quiet routine was shattered, replaced by the weight of what had happened in the kitchen. Luke's presence seemed to haunt her every step, his voice echoing in her mind the words, "Say that again," slowly, playing over and over like a warning. She tried to push him from her thoughts, bury herself in her work, but there was no escaping the pull he had on her. He hadn't returned to the restaurant since that night, but Gianna knew it was only a matter of time before he would. The D'Angelo family didn't let things go, especially not when they were interested in something or someone. It was late one evening, a few days after their first meeting, when the strange thing happened. Gianna had just finished cleaning a table in the far corner of the restaurant when she found an old, ornate key lying between the silverware and an empty wine glass. The key was small, its metal smooth and cool to the touch, and it had a strange marking on it, an insignia she didn't recognize. At first she thought it was just some kind of misplaced trinket, but as soon as she touched it, something inside her stirred. Her curse flared up in a brief flash of pain in her chest. She winced and dropped the key, her fingers trembling. She bent down to pick it up again, her heart racing. The key felt wrong. It was like it belonged to something far darker than her usual troubles. She turned it over in her hand, staring at the symbol etched into the metal. It was a crest, the same one she had seen before hanging in the D'Angelo family's mansion. The one she had only glimpsed in old family portraits. The D'Angelo family mark. Her blood went cold. This key wasn't hers. It had come from him, from Luke. That night, when the restaurant had emptied out and the city outside was wrapped in its usual fog, Gianna took the key to her small apartment. She had to find out what it opened. Her fingers shook as she slid the key into the door of a closet she hadn't opened in years. Behind the door, hidden deep in the corner, was a small forgotten chest. It was a family heirloom, a relic passed down through generations. No one had bothered to open it for as long as she could remember, and for good reason. The chest was linked to the curse in her bloodline. It had been sealed away, locked tight, since before Gianna had been born. As she inserted the key into the chest's lock, she felt a jolt of energy pass through her, a current that ran deep. It was like the chest itself was alive, waiting for something. The lock clicked open with a soft sound, and Gianna slowly lifted the lid. Inside the chest were old, yellowed papers, books filled with strange symbols, and a few trinkets that had never made sense to her. But there was something else, and something she hadn't expected. A letter. She picked it up carefully, her hands trembling as she unfolded the delicate parchment. The letter was written in a language she didn't recognize, but something about the words seemed familiar. She frowned, trying to make sense of the swirling symbols, but as her eyes traced the letters, something strange happened. A voice whispered in her mind, a voice she knew all too well. "To break the curse, you must choose." Gianna's heart skipped a beat. She had heard those words before, years ago, when she was just a child. Her grandmother had spoken them to her once in a whispered voice, before disappearing from her life forever. But now they were here on this page, and they were clearer than she'd ever remembered. The letter went on, explaining that the curse could only be broken by the person who was bound by it. That person was her, but there was a price, and a choice she had to make. The curse would either claim her life or the life of someone else. There was no escape without loss. Gianna dropped the letter, her chest tight with fear. The weight of it all crushed her. For years she had lived with the burden of the curse, believing she would die alone, unable to touch anyone without causing harm. But now, with Luke's involvement, everything had changed. She had no idea how he was tied to this curse, but she could feel the connection growing stronger by the day. The next evening, Luke returned. He appeared like a shadow in the doorway of the restaurant, his tall figure framed by the dim light from outside. Gianna froze when she saw him, her pulse racing. She hadn't expected him to show up so soon. And now she wasn't sure what to say, what to do. Would he demand answers about the curse? Or would he play his usual game of teasing, pushing her boundaries further? Luke's eyes scanned the room before they locked onto hers. His gaze was sharp, assessing as though he already knew everything. He took a slow step toward her, his presence dominating the space between them. "You found it, didn't you?" His voice was low, knowing. Gianna didn't answer immediately. Instead, she felt a strange calm wash over her. There was no escaping the truth now. She couldn't hide anymore. Not from him, not from herself. Found what? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The key, Luke replied. The one that opens doors to things you don't want to know. Gianna's breath caught. She had been hoping he didn't know about the key. She had been foolish to think she could hide it. I didn't ask for any of this, she said, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay calm. I didn't ask for your family or your curse. All I want is to be left alone. Luke stepped closer, his face only a few inches from hers now. He was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. You're not alone, Gianna. Not anymore. His voice softened, the usual hardness replaced with something deeper. And you can't run from this. Gianna stepped back, her hand instinctively reaching for the edge of the table to steady herself. What do you want from me? She whispered. I want the truth. I want to understand what's happening to you, to me, to both of us. His words stirred something inside her. For the first time, she realized that Luke wasn't just trying to control her or break her down. He was just as trapped as she was. They both were, and maybe, just maybe, they could help each other. But Gianna wasn't ready to trust him yet. She couldn't let herself. Before she could say anything else, Luke turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, heart pounding, the echo of his words hanging in the air. You'll have to decide, Gianna, he called over his shoulder, whether you want to break the curse or let it break you. The dim glow of the restaurant's chandeliers barely pierced the fog that clung to the city streets outside. Inside, the air was thick with murmurs, the clinking of glasses and the rustle of silk suits. It was a place for those who wanted to be seen but not heard, the rich, the powerful, the dangerous. And tonight there was a new face among them. Gianna wiped her hands on the hem of her apron and gave the table one last glance. The family-owned restaurant had always been her quiet corner in a world full of secrets. It was where she could blend in, stay hidden. She had no choice but to hide. The curse that ran through her veins demanded it. The curse was something Gianna never talked about. It was a part of her, a dark shadow that followed her wherever she went. Every time she got too close to anyone, every time someone touched her, the curse flared up and the damage would be too great to bear. She'd lost friends, family, even lovers to it. She had learned to keep her distance. No one ever asked why she was always alone, and she never told. Tonight, however, things were different. At a table in the far corner of the room sat Luciano D'Angelo, the youngest of the D'Angelo Mafia family. His reputation preceded him. Tall, sharply dressed, with eyes that seemed to see through everything, Luciano was the kind of man who made others nervous without speaking a word. He commanded attention with every glance, every movement. And tonight his attention was on her. Gianna did her best to avoid looking at him, but it was impossible. There was something about his presence that pulled her in like gravity. She wasn't the only one who noticed. The usual hum of conversation seemed to quiet around him. She could feel his eyes on her, studying her. He wasn't like the usual patrons. The others came and went, their faces unreadable, their voices low. But Luke was different. He lingered even when he wasn't speaking. His gaze followed her every step, and then, as if drawn by an unseen force, his eyes locked onto hers. Gianna froze, feeling the weight of his stare. It was like a challenge, but she couldn't quite understand why. She turned away, hurrying toward the kitchen, her heart pounding faster than usual. The last thing she needed was more attention. She had worked too hard to keep a low profile, to avoid the touch of anyone, to remain unnoticed. Yet tonight she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. The pull of someone else's curiosity. Back at the bar, Luke was still watching her, the faintest smile playing at the corners of his lips. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a knowing one, like he saw through all the walls she had built around herself. Gianna let out a quiet sigh as she entered the kitchen, pushing the door open with a soft thud. Her mind raced. Why was he looking at her like that? What did he want? She forced herself to focus on the dishes in front of her, but the image of Luke's face wouldn't leave her mind. There was something dangerous about him, something dark. He was a mafia boss, after all, and everyone knew that people like him didn't get to the top without stepping on a few heads. Gianna cursed softly under her breath, her lips moving in the familiar rhythm of the words. She didn't even realize she had spoken aloud until the door to the kitchen opened again, and a voice cut through the air. Say that again, slowly. Gianna froze. It was Luke's voice, close, smooth, and far too calm. She turned slowly, her heart leaping into her throat. Luke stood in the doorway, tall and imposing, his dark eyes locked on hers. There was no mistaking it. He had heard her. The curse she muttered was in Italian, a language no one around here understood, but he did. She could feel the blood drain from her face. Panic rose in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. "I didn't say anything," she lied, her hands trembling as she wiped them on her apron. Luke's gaze never wavered. He stepped into the kitchen, his gaze sweeping over the room as if he owned it. And in a way he did. The D'Angelo family owned half the city, their wealth and power stretching into every corner. Gianna had never cared about any of that. She didn't care about the Mafia or the danger it brought. She only cared about surviving, about keeping her secret buried. "You cursed under your breath," he said, his voice smooth as velvet, in Italian. It wasn't hard to hear. Gianna's stomach twisted. She hated the fact that she couldn't hide her words from him. No one else had ever paid enough attention to her to notice. But Luke did. "It's nothing," she said quickly, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "I just sometimes talk to myself." Luke tilted his head slightly, a silent challenge in his eyes. He knew it was more than that. "I know what curses sound like," he said, stepping even closer. "But yours, there's something different about it." "Why don't you tell me what it really means?" Gianna's breath caught. Her curse wasn't something she could explain. It wasn't just words. It was magic, dark, old magic that had been passed down in her family for generations. The kind of magic that twisted everything it touched, the kind that left scars on the soul, not just the body. She couldn't tell him that. She couldn't tell him anything. "Please, just leave it," she said, trying to maintain some distance. She felt trapped. She couldn't stay here with him. She had to get away, but Luke wasn't done. He stepped even closer until she could feel the heat of his body just inches from hers. His breath was steady, controlled, yet there was something unsettling about his presence. "You're not like the others," he murmured. "I can see it. There's power in you, hidden beneath all that quiet, and I want to know more." Gianna's pulse quickened. She didn't know how to respond to that. What could she say? She wasn't powerful. She was broken. She had nothing to offer except pain. His eyes never left hers, and for a moment Gianna wondered if he could hear her heart racing. She could feel it, a steady drumbeat in her chest. Her body screamed at her to run, to get away, but something in Luke's gaze held her in place. "I don't want anything from you," she said, almost too softly to hear. "I'm just a waitress. That's all I'll ever be." Luke's lips curved upward, a dangerous glint flashing in his eyes. "I don't think so," he said, his voice low. "We both know there's more to you than that." Before Gianna could respond, he turned and walked out of the kitchen without another word. The door swung shut behind him, leaving her standing there, her breath shallow and her mind spinning.